Here I will show several frameworks that were created some time ago, which I regard as not only helpful but also among the most important one. You can definitely put together a collection of 200 frameworks and claim that these are all valuable, but what would be your top 5 most important frameworks to guide your decisions? And yes, you can start answer saying that, okay, I wouldn't narrow my thinking to just few frameworks. However, in the end, whatever the person is, in the end, the operations of the person still can be clustered back and explained by few models that the person is using, even though the person does not realize it. So I would like to share a few that I personally consider as important guiding principles. The reality is that there's much more less important info than actually other way around. The reality is that there's much less important info than not important. And if we just take all the information and we try to kind of draw um, the the plot where we somehow specify, the important information, the unimportant information, and the level of attention we should pay to, it would look like this. There's a lot of attention that is important to pay to that part of the chart, and the rest should be granted just a little bit of our attention. The trick is to ensure that this is how our attention distributed. Most often it happens that it's distributed like a horizontal line, or these bars are much lower and there's much more weight for the other bars. This is a relay model. If we look at the logic, basically is if you switch off, if we talk it in a simple way, if you switch off electricity here, it will be still here, it will be still here. But if you switch electricity here, if you cut the line, there will be no electricity anywhere here. And the question is, where do you want, if your goal is to turn off electricity, where do you want to do that? Do you want to run around and switch it off in all these multiple switchers, relays, or you want just to shut down the one most important switch which is off, basically, which will mark your task as accomplished, which is turning off the lights or switching off the electricity. So in this case, it's easy to conclude that it will be probably more meaningful to aim at switching off this main relay instead of running around and switching, hundreds of them on that level. So basically, this is the idea. Where are you running? Are you? And that's the question I'm asking myself very often. Like, am I trying to switch off these many switches over here, or I really figure out already where is the main switch to turn off, and I'm basically on the way to that point to switch it off over there. In essence, that also means that it is more important to focus on higher level changes, because if the higher level changes happen, then the lower level changes happen automatically. A little bit of drawing here. I just wanted to conduct the idea that normal distribution is everywhere, and this is what really matters. And if we want that in some kind of work, the results, to have the results really two standard deviations different from the average, then this is that requires some activity that is also two standard deviations different from the average. This is simple logic, however, it's tricky to basically to ask you myself or yourself in a fair way and to conclude that there is a match between these two dimensions. So very often, when we ask the people, okay, what are your expectations regarding your outcomes, people would say, okay, my expectation about my outcomes that is are that they are two standard deviations different from the average outcome by an average citizen or whatever is the peer group the person is using. And then the second part of the question, okay, are you doing something that is also two standard deviation different from the average? And actually, if you look at this thoroughly, then it turns out that not. So, tricky situation. Another way to look at the same thing, probabilities are everywhere and outliers do not matter. This is a cognitive bias which automatically drags us into paying much more attention to outliers instead of focusing on the normal distributions. And if there is an outlier, Steve Jobs and Bill Gates did not finish university, and look how cool it is can be. This information should be completely disregarded. Yes, it's exciting, interesting, it does drag a lot of attention, but it is not valuable in the sense that it's just an outlier. And there's no point of thinking in outliers and hoping to um, to basically achieve objectives by hoping that me or you will become an outlier. This is also kind of a competition model. We can say there is a competition, right? And if I win the competition, I enjoy it. I feel good. Now, a competition consists of rounds, and it's completely fine not to win every single round. Basically, what's happening if some round you drop out as someone who lost the the round? Then there are two paths, right? It's either training in basically retrospectives, working on the mistakes, figuring out what should be different, focusing on instructions, on trainings, and spending time in a rich ecosystem of friends who are also sportsmen and who have similar objectives. Or it's basically landing into a parking, so to say, which is a crystallized social network of mutual support that basically is there just to continuous the damage and to comfort the people who landed there and to stabilize them in the sense that they are not entering the game again. So if at some point of time you figure out that you park at the parking, then it's important to have the ability to kind of leap jump into the training mode, because then you're here, there's also the return that is happening. I call it monadology, based on the using the name of the book by Leibniz. I'm sure that professionals will tell me that this is not accurate analogy. However, I like it a lot, and concept here is there is the town, the life. We stay on hills, we look at the city and the town, and we see different things. And our hill is our emotions, our experiences, our past, and everyone has their own hill, and everyone sees something different. So, two conclusions here. One is you will never see what the other person sees, but it's valuable to remember what the other person sees because it will help you orientate in the city, in this kind of reality which is beyond what you perceive. So maybe it sounds extremely simple and obvious. However, I mean, if it's so obvious, why we fail to put this point of view in work? It's so often that our actions are only based on our own perceptions, our own experiences, our own conclusions, which is, I would say, completely wrong. Because if we keep in mind that there is a city and everyone has their own hill from which he or she observes the city, then the conclusion is that the most accurate, appropriate way to orientate in the city is sometimes to do things that do not seem rational to us. It can be rational to do what does not seem rational. Another way of the same picture, another way to represent it, I call it monology part 2. You see here three people. They stay somewhere and they observe the dots. And there's one guy who says, I see two dots because the other two dots are behind the first two. There's another guy who says, I see three dots. There's another guy who also says, I see three dots. But the tricky part is that the only way how this can happen is that there are in fact four dots there. There's no way that basically you cannot come up with an image here where there will be three dots here and these three people standing in their own um, place, right? Wherever do they stay, um, seeing what they currently claim they see. So, and that's once again basically bring us back to the previous conclusion that only by taking into account whatever the other people tell me and taking into account where do they stand, what is their hill, I can make the most accurate judgment about their reality, which for sure I am confident I do not see as a full picture. There's no way I can climb such a hill that will ensure that I see the reality at its fullest. There's no such hill. And very often, what we are doing is we are trying to climb the hill, the biggest hill, and basically ensure, okay, my hill is such a hill that I am actually perceiving the reality to its fullest. This can never be the case. This is the funny trick here. This can never be the case. And I would say that the two, claims. One is the person says, okay, I have the biggest hill, and therefore I'm very confident in my decision. I would trust that kind of person less than another person who would say, okay, from my hill, I see this, but I'm hearing this saying this saying that, and this saying that, and I know where do they stand, and based on all that, I make this kind of a conclusion about the dots about the city that we see. Another framework here, and also I consider it among the most important ones to use as a guiding principle. So we have some beliefs, we have some goals, based on the goals, the actions that we take. And goals formulate expectations and actions formulate results. Now the question is, do this to match. And if results match expectations, then we are very happy and produce other goals. By our actions, we produce further results. And now, what happens if they don't match? So typically the starting point is to adjust the actions, and this is kind of the feedback loop, similarly, to all the agile methodologies. But so we adjust there's a feedback loop where, okay, our results do not match our expectations, so let us adjust the actions for better fit. So that's the first loop. And when if after this adjustment the results match expectations, then again we're happy. What if after multiple times trying there and changing the actions, the results don't match expectations? Okay, potentially there's a bigger loop that we take and we change our goals. And then again, there's some actions and there's some results and expectations. And what happens if again the results don't match expectations? So after enough of trying, what's happening is that we adjust the um, not only goals but also the beliefs. So the loop, we're taking over. If the mismatch continues, then there's a bigger loop of change that we take. And the biggest loop of change is really just adjusting the full world view. So this is happening. It's there. This can explain many things around us and behaviors of other people. One additional remark on that same topic is that it's super important to separate in time the period when we just focus on the actions and the moment when we review the actions. It cannot happen in parallel simultaneously, because then it will be just a mess. Just to conclude, final slide: how to draw a rooster in 1 minute. And this is not about drawing a rooster, it's about thinking, talking, addressing questions, coming closer to the set objectives and set goals. There are two ways to do it. One is then just start focusing on one nuance, and then given that there's a limited amount of time, at some point of time you get something very well, you don't get the rest, and basically whoever looks at that probably is not even able to figure out what is this, is it a rooster or what. And there's another way to do it, starting with a scratch and then increasing the accuracy across the picture. But the claim here is this is the right way of approaching topics.